Welcome to episode 11 on Ladies Talking Love, Harnessing the Power of Menstruation with April Davis from the Vagina Blog. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. In this episode with April, we cover topics from birth control to finding power in our menstrual cycles. April Davis is a compelling speaker, creative consultant, visual artist, and wordsmith. She has been featured in magazines, on podcasts, and on stage, sharing her wisdom, humor, and knowledge as the creator of the Vagina Blog and the Vagina Blog podcast. April's passion and drive have created an entire community around female body health as she empowers women and vagina owners to love themselves fully while focusing on bringing light to taboo topics that we just don't talk enough about, like sex and periods, along with self-love and positivity. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. If you haven't already, we'd love to have you pause the episode and hop over to join our Instagram community at ladies.talkinglove. This is the place where we continue the conversations about each episode and other important topics. I also love hearing your thoughts, questions, successes, and struggles as we cover all types of topics. Participating in this community is a great way for you to share your input for future podcast episodes. We'd also love to have you subscribe to our monthly newsletter. You can do that by visiting our website, ladiestalkinglove.com. So without further ado, let's talk love. I am stoked to welcome April Davis onto Ladies Talking Love today. Thanks so much for joining me, April.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can you just give us a little background how you decided to start the Vagina Blog and what kind of got you into women's health, women's everything, because your work is amazing.
Thank you so much. So I mean, it's always a long story, right? But I have a background in emergency medicine. I also have always had such a draw and a natural curiosity to all of these things. So this has just always been part of my life. And I worked for a nurse midwife for 5 years as her birth assistant. I also worked as a doula and as a birth photographer. So I was very steeped like in the birth world, like in every way. And it's funny because I've always had such a strong fascination with sex and sexuality and a healthy sexuality. So there's all that. And when you kind of start hanging out with birth workers, suddenly you start tracking your cycle. And interestingly enough, I just kind of stumbled into menstrual discs. So that was like my first introduction to something other than tampons to use internally. So it's interesting how it's all come together. And I decided a couple of years ago that I really needed to retire from birth work. Just based on some of my family's needs and my own needs. And when I did that, I was like, what do I even do with all this information?
Yeah, so much.
I know a lot about vaginas and I need to tell the people. And so I started the Vagina Blog. And right now I'm actually back in school too, getting my master's degree in social work. And so I'm hoping to become a licensed social worker and start changing some laws.
Yes. What laws? What are you thinking?
Sex education is probably number one for me. And I'm very excited to see that there's so much of that already happening right now. So it may even be all done by the time I get there. And consent in birth and just across the board in medical care. One of the most disturbing things that I saw, especially as a birth photographer, was a lack of consent in people's care, like during labor and delivery. This idea that you could just sign a blanket statement of consent with your doctor is really disturbing. It needs to be individual procedures. So yeah, we have some stuff to fix.
Yes. Some of my friends, I've heard their stories and I'm like, the doctor did what?
Oh, I've seen some things.
You said no and they did what? And not even necessarily but just whoever it was.
But too often it's a
Yes.
he, let's be honest. And it's really frustrating.
True. Yes. I did have that experience with one of my first. I was like, I'm going to have a woman who's had babies before. Like none of this. You can't tell me what to do. You don't know.
It's hard. And even in the nicest way possible, it's like, look, you just don't have a vagina. No one's trying to be rude or anything. Like, can't know as well. You just can't.
So true. And I have so many questions I would love to ask you today, but we're focusing on menstrual cycles. We'll have to have you back on for some of the other ones. But can you basically just kind of help us in period 101? I think a lot of us weren't educated with the information we should have been, and not to blame our parents. I think they didn't get the education that they should have had, but kind of walk us through periods. What are the seasons? What do they look like?
Yes, the menstrual cycle is a lost art because our ancestors knew this stuff backwards and forwards. And then we just kind of lost it over the years. We stopped talking about it. It stopped becoming a necessity to know all these things. So I love that we're reviving this because it's really important information to know. And it's so baseline. It's such baseline to like our bodies and our health and our autonomy. Like it's so important. So with the menstrual cycle, when I see menstrual cycle, so many people think that I'm just talking about the week that you're bleeding. And that is a phase of the menstrual cycle, but that's one of 4 phases. And so I love comparing the menstrual cycle to the 4 seasons because it's so easily understandable. And on top of it, like it just ties us right back into nature, which I love. I feel like it just fits, right? And so menstruation would be your inner winter. This is when we want to hibernate. This is when we are tired. This is when we want warming foods. This is a time to be very gentle in terms of exercise. You want to do more yoga, more walking, more not super heavy lifting, not really intense, heavy workouts. And I know some people will be like, but I feel good when I lift heavy on my period. Okay, that might be part of your personal baseline. And if you know that about yourself and don't feel like you're doing harm, then of course, by all means, continue to. So we have a really good understanding of our inner winter, right? The next phase,
let's just back up for a sec. You're telling me as a woman, this is like my whole life then. My cycle is my whole life. Okay.
Yes. Soon as you start menstruating until you are done menstruating. And yes. And the only time that you step out of these phases is when you are either on hormone or birth control, which essentially puts your body in this weird state of pause. It stops your sexual development. It shuts down all your own natural hormone production. And instead you're on these contraceptive drugs that mimic some of what your body's doing, but it doesn't mimic your actual cycle, because if it did, obviously we get pregnant, right? So contraceptive drugs shut all this down. You end up in this weird, it's almost like you're in menopause. Essentially, you lose all the protections of ovulation. You lose all the protections that progesterone and estrogen offer. And so if you're on hormonal birth control of any kind, you are not cycling. The bleeding that you're experiencing is just a withdrawal symptom of the drugs that you're on. It's not actually a period. And it's not necessary to bleed if you're on hormonal birth control. For those of you who are doing it, I'm a huge fan of just not, because it's not real. And it's not necessary.
So what do you use? What do you use for contraceptives?
My husband's snipped. I'm really, really, really privileged right now. Yes.
I'm like, after we're done having babies, it's your turn. Your turn to do something.
One thing I do love, IUDs typically allow your body to continue to cycle. So even the Mirena IUD that does have a drug in it, it actually does allow your body typically to ovulate. So you still get a lot of the protections of ovulation. You actually still cycle. But a lot of times you don't bleed, and it can protect against pregnancy. So I love those 2 options. There's also fertility awareness method if you wanted to start charting heavily enough and in detail enough to use it as a birth control. There's condoms, there's withdrawal, which, if you do it really well, but always like there's internal condoms. And here's the thing too, then there's always birth control. Like I've been on birth control because it was not an option for me to get pregnant at the time. It's okay. I just want people to understand what it's doing to their body. That's all. It's informed consent that we're looking for, not necessarily heavy limitations. So I always want to make sure people know, like, birth control is not a Flintstones vitamin. We've really made it into this, like, yeah, everyone's on it. It's no big deal. And you can just pick it up, and they're getting away from, needing a prescription. And those are a little bit concerning for me, those standards, because it is having a massive effect on your body and has very serious potential side effects and long-term effects on your body. And we just need to be aware of those. I don't think it's wise to sign up for taking a drug every day without having any idea what you're really getting yourself into,
What are some of the protections that happen when you ovulate?
So ovulating actually protects us against a lot of different types of cancer. It's really good for things like our hair, our nails, our overall body systems. Like our bodies they do these things on purpose. They're seeing a lot of connection between the uterus and our brain. So like there's a lot of really important things that happen with ovulation and with cycling. And so when you shut all that down, and also sexual development, they're seeing in people who maybe start hormonal birth control, like contraceptive drugs, at like 13 and then stop at 30, their sex organs oftentimes may not be as developed at 30 as they would have been, because they've been in this weird state of like not functioning for so long. So it's almost like you have these couple years of catch up from 13, even though you're 30.
Yeah.
So which then you start to go, this is making more sense why people are struggling to get pregnant after they're coming off of birth control, because when they designed the drug, it was never meant to be on for 20 years, 30 years, 15 years. And that's what we're seeing more and more. When they designed it, it was for, you were going to take this for a year or two, and then have all the babies all the rest of your life. Because it was designed in like the 50s, it was a totally different time, very different mindset around it. And, so they're just now, like, we've been kind of an experiment for the last 70 years, and they're just now starting to realize that there are very serious long-term effects to doing this to your body.
Wow. That's interesting and cool to know with the IUDs, though, that there is a hormonal way that is still kind of letting you get that ovulation, but also just to kind of figure out what works for you. And man, so many things we could talk about.
Oh, so many. That's the thing. It really is. There's so many different avenues, and and I think it's important to talk about these things, because I never want to be like, I don't want to scare people out of birth control, because like I said, I've taken it knowing all of these things, but I was just well aware of what I was doing. There are supplements you can take that are going to kind of help assist. They're going to replenish some of the things that the birth control is doing. And I think it's important to be aware.
Yes. So let's get back with kind of the menstrual cycle here. And I want to hear as we go along some of those, because you even talk about in the different seasons, there's things you can take to help with those seasons. So give us the lowdown.
So we covered winter. So that's your menstruation. That's the week that we're all really familiar with, right? Is winter. After winter, we head into our inner spring, which is our follicular phase. And this is when our energy returns. This is a good time to tackle a huge project. This is when it feels easy, because I think for so many of us, we notice like, oh, I just don't feel good. Something's wrong with me, or my life is terrible and I'm doing a bad job. No, you're just in your inner winter or your inner fall. You're just going through a luteal phase. That's all. It's just a bad week to try and tackle X, Y, and Z. I'm all about playing to your strengths. And once you understand your menstrual cycle, you can start to do that. Follicular phase, great time to plan a vacation, great time to clean out the garage, great time to tackle a huge project at work that you've been thinking through. You have that energy. So those things don't feel hard anymore. They feel easy. They feel like something you can do.
I love that idea, planning around these phases, because no one told me that. And I wish someone would have told me about that with my wedding.
Yes.
Because ended up having my period on our honeymoon. And I was like, man, I didn't even think about that. Like no one mentioned it.
I tried not to. I was supposed to have it the week before, and then definitely was late by like a week and had it on my honeymoon anyway. And it was like, well, we tried, but it was stress.
Yes.
So but that's the thing that's nice. It's really nice when you're turning your cycle to go like, you know what? Let's not go out of town that week. Let's go the next week, because then I won't be bleeding. Because it's a pain to have your period when you're out vacationing or in a swimsuit, and it's just more convenient not to. And so,
and you feel better.
Yes. And I don't feel like traveling when I'm in my luteal phase. It just feels hard. Whereas in my follicular phase, it feels exciting. And it's just a week or two difference, really. Something that is so hard to do 2 weeks before can be so easy to do 2 weeks later. So if you can start to map your life out around that, it's fantastic.
And I love just knowing that, accepting it and being able to plan around it. And then you're like, you give yourself room to be a woman.
It's really funny when I teach this class about this, because you can see people start to bristle at this idea of like, this sounds excessive. Men don't have to deal with this crap, so I shouldn't have to either. Anything a man can do, I can do bleeding. Like, I think our generation especially gets very like, no, I'm tough. I can work through it. Here's the thing. U.S. women's soccer team, they started paying attention to menstrual cycles, and they started training the women differently based on their cycle. So when they were menstruating, they trained differently than when they were in their follicular phase or than when they were ovulating. They took the World Cup. They were the first ones to start training women athletes like women instead of just training them like men liked. There is benefits to treating your body like it's female. I promise you, there is so much peace and winning that comes if you start to tune into some of this, offer yourself the forgiveness that you need, offer yourself the room and the space that you need, accommodate these things. It sounds excessive initially, but I'm telling you, it is so much better. It's so much better.
And I can say from my own experience, definitely have been in that mindset of, I can do this. I'm just going to be like the same hormones every day. And I feel like as I've started to notice a little more and notice, I'm on my period this week, I need a nap as many days this week as I can get. Suddenly I can be more productive because I'm listening to my body instead of when I'm not and pushing through. I'm just tired all the time, which happens sometimes anyway with little kids, but I'm way more just tired all the time instead of being able to follow these phases.
I can't tell you how many people, it's interesting. I've read accounts over and over again of people who are like, I used to work out the same day every single month. I got up at 6 a.m. I lifted weights. I did cardio on the off days. I did, and as soon as they switched over to working with their cycle, they were able to work out more effectively. They lost weight more effectively. They gained muscle mass more effectively. Like, our bodies are not meant to be trained like men. Men have a 24-hour hormone cycle. We have a 28-day hormone cycle. We are the same person 12 days out of the year.
Wow.
And it explains a lot of things. This is why when it comes to medicine is very misogynistic and male oriented, but it's because they can experiment on male bodies. They are reliable and predictable. Female bodies are only the same 12 days out of the year. We're a nightmare to do any testing on and try to get any understanding of, because we are cyclical creatures who have a very long cycle compared to men. And my absolute favorite visualization of this is if you go outside and you look up at the sky during the day, the sun rises in the east, it sets in the west, it's there every single day. It is completely predictable. It's a big yellow ball, one way, other way, done, right? 24-hour cycle, bam, easy breezy. That's your male energy. Now, if you go out at night and you look up at the sky, what do you see? Where is she? Is she even out? Is she full? Is she crescent? Is she napping? Was she out during the day? We're the moon.
I love that.
There's nothing, no one looks at the moon and is like, you could be the sun if you tried harder.
We don't need two suns. No. We need these phases to work together.
Exactly. We need the sun, right? We need that stable male energy. And we have some of that inside each of us. But you know what? We're the moon, and the sun needs the moon. The tides need the moon. The bees need the moon. The earth relies on the moon, right? For all of its cyclical regulation, everything. We're essential. We're just
Amen to that.
The sun. That's all.
And when I first heard you kind of talk about this idea, I was actually outside and I almost started crying, just like this relief of I can follow what I need. I don't have to try to be the sun. But then I also had this little twinge of wait, but how do I do this? So after we go through the cycles, we're going to talk more about that. But so going into kind of spring is the follicle phase. What happens with the next phase? So
then we head from spring into summer. And I think we're going into uncharted territory, right? Because our society is masculine and it's based around masculine energy and masculine needs. And that's just where it's at right now. So I'm ready to bring in the feminine energy. Let's get back in our lane and win. Because right now we're in the lane
We're
we
doing
don't
it.
belong in, and we don't need to be competing in. That's just not our fight. That's not our
Yeah.
game. Why are we fighting?
Yeah.
You know? So we head from spring into summer. This is when we're ovulating. This is when we are dangerously sexy and productive and on top of things, and we feel amazing and we look amazing. We have a natural sense of confidence. A lot of things that felt hard 2 weeks ago do not feel hard right now. We love being social. This is a great time to be on camera. This is a great time to give a presentation. This is a great time to go out with friends, be on vacation, and be out in the world, because it's not going to feel hard. It's going to feel easier, you know? Mm-hmm. So, and when you have to wield this superpower responsibly, or you could end up pregnant because you're ovulating.
That's a good thing to throw in there. Recognize the feeling, but be careful.
Yeah. So ovulation is like such a great time. And this is also when you want to start tying things up, knowing that you are heading into your luteal phase. So your luteal phase would be your inner autumn. It's fall, right? And during this time, about midway through that week, we lose all our progesterone and all of our estrogen at the same time. This feels a lot like, who even am I? I hate my spouse and my children and our house. Why do we even live here? Move to Europe. I told you last month at this exact same time that we should move to Europe. Why do we still live here? I hate everything. I made huge mistakes in my life. I doubt everything that I'm doing. Why did I decide? Like, it's the inner mean girl is the best way to describe it. Comes out. Some people have named her Barb or Karen. Mine's name is Dave. I don't know why it's a dude, but it's Dave. Shows up and starts critiquing everything I've ever done. It's an existential crisis. And initially that can feel so negative, but here's the thing. Our bodies naturally put us into an existential crisis. And you know what? I feel like we make better decisions with our lives if we look at this as a tool, because we naturally question all the decisions that we've made. And you know what? I commit to my spouse again every month. I stay here with the kids and the husband, and I don't leave the house, right? I stay. I haven't moved to Europe. I choose them every month as I question my life decisions. I come back to them every time. But I think there is wisdom and value in questioning your life. And we do this naturally as part of our hormonal cycle.
How do you switch to being able to make that shift? Because when I'm in the luteal phase, I'm like, I don't even want to touch these decisions because they feel so wrong. And I feel like I made big mistakes on everything.
I think it depends on the month for me too, and just where I'm at. Sometimes it's muting a lot of it and just knowing, like, but there's so much comfort in going, oh, you know what? I'm in my luteal phase. I probably just went through a horrible hormone crash. And I'm going to determine in a couple days how much of this is real and how much of this is just me kind of going through some things. Journal, write it all down. You know, think about it next week when you're menstruating. And if it sticks, then maybe it is time to start thinking about changes, right?
But then you can kind of decipher between the two. Like, I was feeling bad about this, but this is good. But maybe this other decision I was thinking about, I like that a lot. Yeah, because I've always been like, I'm not making decisions.
Yeah. And that's okay. This is when we see a PMS, PMDD. And for those with those, but PMDD especially, that is a time to just be like, I literally can't trust myself right now. And that is okay, because I know that about myself.
Can you tell us what PMDD is?
It's premenstrual dysphoric disorder. I was like, what's the D again? It's really similar to PMS, but it's more serious. Some people actually will take medication for PMDD or, you know, do other things. I know sometimes some shifts in diets can help. Sometimes a shift in supplements can help. Magnesium is a game changer for all of this. And I take it the entire month, but it makes your periods easier. It eases these types of symptoms in terms of irritability and anxiety. It helps you sleep. It helps you poop. Like, magnesium is a great supplement.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. So, and I highly recommend the book, The Period Repair Manual by Laura Brydon. If you're not following Laura Brydon, you need to be. She's also has an Instagram that's amazing. She has a blog that's amazing. And her book, The Period Repair Manual, is such a fantastic resource because you can say, okay, I'm suffering from really horrible acne and I don't want to take birth control just because of acne. That's ridiculous. So I'm going to start taking zinc. And then she'll have like a list of like, here's some stuff you can try. Right. Because seriously, taking contraceptive drugs for something like acne is like going and getting a cast for something that needs a Band-Aid. It's just not necessarily to override so much of your body's natural systems for something that simple. And it may be, if you've tried all the things in the book and you're there, once again, like you have to make these decisions for you, but try zinc, try a couple other different supplements that could potentially have the same effect.
And you have a list, if you sign up for your newsletter, right? You can do that on your website that will tell you things you can take throughout the different phases to help.
So I have it's broken down by season and it talks about your strengths, your weaknesses, and kind of what you would like to eat. There's also seed cycling, which I really love. It's when you actually eat totally different, you take different seeds throughout your cycle because they offer the exact stuff like nutrients that your body needs during that type of during that phase of your cycle. And so during your follicular phase, it's pumpkin seeds, and then it goes to sunflower seeds, and then it goes to flax seeds, and then it goes to sesame seeds, pumpkin and flax is the first half. Sunflower and sesame is the second half. Sorry. But there are kits you can get that already do this for you. I just throw them in my smoothie and I love them because seeds are good for you no matter what.
Even if you mess up which week, it's still good for you.
That's the, like I've had people be like, does seed cycling really work? And I mean, here's the, seeds are good for you. They're high fiber. They're good for digestion. They're going to help with estrogen dominance because they're so high in fiber. Like there's so many benefits to eating seeds that I'm like, they don't not work.
They're going to help with whatever.
They're going to help you regardless.
Like I said before, when I first heard this, I had this part of me that was like, but how do I do this in this male dominated society? Because some of us might have jobs where it's like, I actually have to produce this thing during my luteal phase and I am crazy. Or maybe, we have kids that need us. What are some tips you have for us to kind of work with these cycles in the way our world is right now? And hopefully we can start shifting to have everyone understand the different phases, but I'd love some of your tips.
I'm actually, this is my favorite question. I always cover this at the end of my presentation where it's like, but what if I have to be fine when I'm not fine? I still believe there is so much value in being like, it's my luteal phase. I know going into this, that this is probably going to be more difficult. So I'm going to give myself that much more grace. You're just not stuck in this, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? Why can I not get it together? Why can I not? Instead, it's like, oh, I'm in my luteal phase. And I'm really asking myself to do hard things right now. And it's just going to feel harder than it would if it was 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks ahead. And that's okay. I'm going to take more naps. I'm going to go to bed a lot earlier and I'm going to push through this and it's going to be harder and that's okay. But knowing that there's so much relief that comes with even realizing that instead of this, what is wrong? What is wrong with me? Why can't I get it together? Is my life like this? I think my whole life is like that. You can spiral so quickly and get stuck in that. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what to do. I don't know.
Thinking about that, my husband sometimes will point out, be like, I think you're probably about to start your cycle. And where I'm at right now, sometimes I'm like, don't tell me that.
Stupid face. You're not allowed to know.
What? But how can we kind of make this a bonding thing? Because I think it really can be. What are some of your tips on how we can share our cycles with our partner or spouse and how this can actually bring us together, not only emotionally, but also sexually?
I think there's so much bonding that occurs because the male partners that I know in my life, they're somewhat aware of a lot of these things, but they don't have the words. They don't have the language around it. They don't have a full understanding of what it is. So I actually have found most male partners are like, this is so interesting. I already kind of knew some of this stuff and it had figured out some of these things, but I didn't have a way to describe what was going on. And I didn't know how to talk to my female partner about it because I didn't want to hurt her feelings or make her feel stupid. And this is so good. That's been the response that I've gotten from most people. They love this understanding of oh, I'm just the sun and she's the moon. And oh, yeah, this is of course,
we got this.
It totally makes sense, And I think too, making males aware of how much our society caters to them is only going to help make change happen. Because I just don't think they already know. Because what if you're just super comfortable and everything's great for you, and someone is like, actually, this is terrible for me and it's not working out? How would you know if they didn't say anything?
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to just
so
be
true.
like, I'm a female body. I'm working on a completely different cycle than you are. I'm trying to work within, my strengths and my weaknesses here. And, this week, I'm going to need you to show up more for me. And 2 weeks from now, I will be a superhero who can show up more for you. It's that balance of being in a partnership anyway. And I think it's good. I think it's helpful for male partners to have language and understanding around how to explain like what they're seeing in their partner.
And I think it would be helpful for me in those experiences to be able to say it myself, because sometimes I still struggle sometimes to be like, okay, I'm going into my luteal phase. And just like you said, to say, okay, get into my luteal phase. Will you please help me out? I really need a nap this week, or I need you to help with grocery shopping or whatever it is, just kind of to figure it out. And then kind of going into, because of course we're ladies talking love. So how does this affect our sexuality and our sex life? How can this make it even better to connect with our menstrual cycles?
I think being aware of like what your wants and needs and like what works for you sexually during each phase makes a big difference. I know for me, when I was younger, I loved having sex on my period. It was my favorite. And now that I've gotten older, I just am not super into it. Not my favorite. And so, like I said, maybe we don't plan vacations alone together as parents while I'm menstruating, because I'm really not going to feel like it. I'm 16 years in. I have no problem being like, yeah, no, sorry about that. It's just not, doesn't sound like a fun idea for anybody. But I'm also way more open to the idea of like mutual masturbation while I'm on my period. That sounds great. I don't want anything inside there, but I have no problem having an orgasm. That's fine. But there's also this like, just because it's not happening today doesn't mean it won't happen a week from now or 2 weeks from now when I'm feeling better, when my body's back, in a place where it's interested in sex. And so I think sex totally changes throughout that.
And I think that's really powerful to recognize that changes can happen as we age. When we're younger, like you said, you might want to have sex on your period. When you're older, you might not. And just to keep the conversation open, and not that your partner will expect like, oh, follicle phase, like, let's get it on. But they might also be able to see, oh, she is wanting something a little more, and kind of be there for it. And so I think that's so great to just keep those communication lines open. And I know I could do a lot better at that, because I still am sometimes like, don't talk to me about my period. Like, I can do this. But it's so good to just talk about it. And I'd love to hear how breastfeeding affects your cycle.
I feel like breastfeeding is your 4th trimester of your pregnancy. It is its own, you're a completely different hormonal state. You're not cycling until you are. And so you're like in a suspended state of breastfeeding. So it's kind of its own phase. It's like the trimesters of pregnancy. You have totally different hormonal things going each trimester, and then breastfeeding is its own hormone and hormonal state. And you'll ovulate at some point, and typically always ovulation precedes menstruating when you're breastfeeding. And so you may catch on and go, I feel like I might be ovulating. Things are shifting. And then you'll menstruate 2 weeks later and be like, I was right. I knew it. And that's when you kind of start back into this cycle. And for some people, like for me, I menstruate at 8 weeks postpartum. So I start ovulating right away after I've had a baby. But for some people, I've talked to friends who haven't menstruated for 2 years while they breastfeed. So they're in that suspended state for those 2 years while they're breastfeeding, which would be so awesome.
Yeah. Yes. And when you start, I know I've seen with some of mine, sometimes after I start, when I'm breastfeeding, I'm in this stage right now, my cycles still aren't super consistent. And so it can be hard. How do you kind of work through that? Do you just kind of notice when you're feeling like, oh, I might be ovulating, and just notice that? Or any tips on that?
One thing you can look at, because I actually had someone else ask this, I just posted about this today, and they said, I've had an ablation, which is where they cauterize the inside of the uterus so it can't create a very rich endometrial lining. So you still cycle, but you don't really bleed, or you bleed a lot less because it's all been cauterized and your body's not creating that period blood endometrial lining, right? So I was like, you want to do the opposite now. You want to start looking for cervical fluid and cervical mucus to indicate that you are ovulating. And there's other symptoms you can look for. I love the book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility. It sounds like a mouthful and it sounds like something you would only read if you were trying to get pregnant. But the reality is, taking charge of your fertility is a vagina owner's manual. It's all about how to track your cycle. It's all about the fertility awareness method. I feel like it should be like necessary reading for anybody and everybody, just to grab onto, like, get a better understanding of the whole cycle. But she goes through in the book all the different ways to chart. So you're going to look at the position of your cervix. You're going to take your temperature every single day. You're going to look for cervical mucus, because what we'll start to see, so you menstruate, so you bleed, you usually have a couple days of dry. And then as you start to approach ovulation, you'll start to see more and more cervical mucus or vaginal discharge. You'll see that your underwear gets more and more and more and more slippery. When you ovulate, that's when you're going to be seeing that egg white type of mucus. And this might be as simple as looking in your underwear, or like when you wipe, whenever it's like an oil slick, you're probably
you're like, whoa,
close to ovulation, or you're ovulating. You'll then see that start to taper off again. And then you'll have a couple of days of dry right before you menstruate, and then you'll see bleeding. And so what you can do if you're not bleeding, and this goes for people with an IUD as well, like they don't experience like bleeding, you just chart opposite. You start to chart your ovulation and keep an eye on your cervical mucus and your cervical position. And if you really want to be sure what you're doing, take that temperature every day and you'll start to find your cycle. And when you're breastfeeding, if your cycles are kind of longer or a little bit more irregular, that would be a good way, because you may have 2-week long phases instead of 1 week long, or what you see a lot if you're not ovulating is you'll have a really long luteal phase. So, which sucks. I get this with PCOS. And so I'll ovulate and then have a horribly long luteal phase where I'm stuck in this like angry, depressed, sad state for much, much, much longer. And it's because I didn't ovulate. And so my body wasn't triggered to have all that progesterone and estrogen crash. So then you end up in this weird estrogen dominance, and it feels so icky because your body is supposed to cycle. It likes to cycle.
Yeah. And so then sometimes it might not cycle and ovulate next month. Is that?
Okay? Yeah. So then if you skip a cycle, you don't ovulate. And this is something that was so interesting. A year ago, I went in to see my therapist, who I've been with for like 15 years. And I was explaining stuff to him. And he was like, I'm just going to stop you right there. Something's wrong with your hormones, which I'm so amazed that he caught it like he did. He's like, I just need you to go in. Yeah. We're going to do medical rule out. You've got to go in and get some of this stuff checked, because this doesn't fit, like something's off. And I was like, well, I haven't ovulated the last 2 cycles. Anovulatory cycles will put you into a horrible depression, horrible anxiety, suicidal thought, like all of those types of feelings, and they won't go away. And it's somewhat out of the blue when you notice that you're not ovulating. I was still menstruating, but I wasn't ovulating. And I was having these 34, 35-day cycles. I'm so grateful my therapist caught that. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's because I'm not ovulating. Because what if I'd gone on medication? What if I'd done all these other things? So it's so great to have a knowledge of your cycle when you're dealing with mental health too.
Because it totally affects the seasons. And if we're off it, oh wow, that is so good. So many things we could talk about, April. We could just talk all day. Yeah. Can you give us some tips? Are there some maybe programs or apps that you would suggest to kind of help people as they're starting to chart their cycles?
Totally. And I think people get a little intimidated, right? They're like, this feels like a lot. Really, it's as simple as like, if you already use some sort of planner or calendar in your life, you can so easily take notes and just be like, I've noticed I feel this way today, or I'm struggling with this. You can take a look at your cervical mucus. Like I said, you can start charting when you're actually menstruating. That's going to give you a really good baseline really quickly. Apps like Clue and OvuView and Flow are going to do basics for you really well. I'm a huge fan of keeping an actual journal. And I also feel like everyone should, at least for a period of their life, fully chart their cycle, taking their temperature, checking their cervix, checking on their cervical fluid. And reading the book, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, is going to teach you how to do that. And like you said, it sounds like a big book. It reads like a friend's blog. Like, it's such an easy, fun read. It's so interesting. But those are great places to start. And the other thing that I love that I forgot to mention earlier, there's something wonderful about being like, I'm tired today and life is hard today, but in 2 weeks, it won't be. So today I'm going to lay down. Today, I'm going to eat the food that I'm craving and relax, because in 2 weeks, I won't want brownies this much. And I won't be this tired. I'll have all the energy in the world. So it helps me to like, today I can lay down. It gives me permission to rest when I need
Yeah.
to, knowing that a couple weeks from now, I won't feel this way. I'll feel amazing and be on top of it.
And just giving ourselves that room, I think, is huge, just to change our mental, the way we see menstruation and with our partner and everything, just to both be on the same page and recognize it is huge for me, just to change
It's
that view.
and it's so cool to talk to people who have charted much of their lives, because they can say, oh yeah, I'm on day 21. Actually, on day 22, I get a migraine. So I just know that that's probably going to happen tomorrow. And on 24 to 25, I feel amazing and I do this, and this every month. You get to where you're like, this is weird. This is actually the same things are happening to me every single month. I just didn't clue in until now, which it's wild.
Why weren't we taught this? So going forward with one of my next questions, how do we teach in our boys to kind of respect and understand women's menstruation and this cycle, and also our girls? How do we help them from where they are now? If they haven't already started, when they get there, and if they already have, how do we kind of help teach them about this early?
I think I've been open with my kids about menstruation since the get-go. Like, they wanted to know, what is that cup? Why is it in the bathroom? What do you do with it? Do you drink out of that? What do you know? Like, they want to know all the things. Same with the period underwear. Same with everything in my life, all the time, always. And so instead of saying it's none of your business, for the most part, I have explained just about everything. And so they've known what's going on. And one thing I loved, my fifth grader came home yesterday, my daughter, and said, oh my gosh, mom, this boy went up to the board yesterday and he had an erection. And I just didn't even laugh at him. I was going to laugh at him, and then I didn't laugh at him because I know, like you said, that like that can be embarrassing for them. And because I was like, you would never want someone to laugh at you if you had your period, right? And she's like, no, that would be total.
Yeah.
Like, so we can't laugh at boys with erections. And she was like, yeah, but it was
Yes.
so funny, but she knows what an
Way
erection
to go,
is.
girl.
Yeah, she knows what
Yeah.
happens, that they happen without any sort of warning. So I think putting them on level playing ground, because with my girls, when I was explaining menstruation, they were like, it's not fair that this doesn't happen to boys. I was like, well, boys get erections out of the blue without any warning. And she's like, what's an erection? Well, you know what happens to your little brother when he wakes up in the morning? Like, that can happen to a boy, but they have a bigger penis, so you usually can see it. And, so we explain all these things, and there's no harm in your kids knowing. If anything, she's so empowered to like, okay, that seems funny, but I'm not going to laugh because my mom told me that that's really embarrassing for them,
That's so empowering.
But it's the same, all these phases. Explain it to your boys and your girls. Just give them that information, just like you're teaching them any other thing in their life.
And I'm pretty open. I know not everyone's comfortable, but I feel like being open about my body, they come in the bathroom with me. And of course, if I ask for privacy, we respect it. But I if I don't feel like I need it, they watch me change. I like to use cups as well for my period. And my daughter will be like, oh, is there blood in there? And even just as I've kind of started to look at these phases more, I'll talk to them and be like, I'm really tired today because I'm about to start my period. And so I'm going to take a nap, and I need a nap. And I just think having these open conversations, and for me to be open with my cycle, is a huge way to help educate them.
For boys and girls.
Yes. Yeah. And I was just curious, with your girls as they start, how are you planning to help your daughter kind of track her cycle?
I want to teach her just the basics of it, and also gauge interest. It's a lot. It's a lot to take on it. And I don't know what age she'll start, 12, 13. I just feel like it's a little overwhelming, right? So I want to spoon feed some of this, because I think it'll initially be like, okay, so you started your period now. Let's guess when you'll start your period next, and go, okay, so let's pretend you're going to have a 30-day cycle. You might start your because I think that's good for her to have in her mind, like, okay, about this time every month, I'm going to bleed. And then let's build on it. How do you feel now? Are you noticing you feel this way? And we've talked about vaginal discharge and what that means and why that's happening to her. But I think you build. I love the idea of having a 14-year-old taking charge of your fertility, because it explains everything. And I feel like by the time they're 14, 16, they've been menstruating for a second. They have a grasp on the fact that it's coming every month. And then they can build on this, like, oh, I have different phases. I have different. So I think it's unique to the child. And then as far as boys go, same. I think 14, 16 is when they're starting to like mentally be able to process some of these types of things. And maybe you don't cover it until they're a little bit older, or when they're starting to date women, or you know what I mean? Like that's a great time to be like, hey, girls go through phases in their cycles and this is what it looks like. And one day your partner, or maybe you don't even have a female partner, maybe your daughter one day, maybe this is what it looks like for them. So I think it's good to go through all of that. I loved one thing that is just still so tender to me. Brandon, who has the Birds and the Bees podcast, his mom told him, if you ever see a girl and she has blood on the back of her pants, you don't go tell the girl. You go up to the teacher, you tell the teacher, and then you do anything you can to be hopeful. And he's like, not 1 week after my mom explained this the exact thing happened to me. And he's like, I went up and told the teacher. I was so proud of myself for being a hero. The teacher was able to get her like a sweatshirt to tie around her waist. And like, but he felt so like, I helped. I did a good job. And he was so empowered. I love that. Like, I love teaching our kids to advocate for each other and help each other in those situations. Because puberty is rough.
It's so rough. And they can be compassionate then. Mm-hmm. Boys can be compassionate for girls. Girls can be compassionate for boys. And I think it just adds this whole array of love that we need more of in the world.
Oh, amen. Amen.
Oh, this has been such a great interview. I have loved everything we've talked about, April, and we're definitely going to have you back on to talk about some of these other topics we didn't get to cover as much.
I would love to.
As we're wrapping up, could you just give a couple actionable tips for women who are wanting to start growing their understanding of their menstrual cycle, maybe teaching their kids?
Find a way that you like to track your cycle, whether it's on your wall calendar, whether it's in your written planner, on your phone, on an app on your phone. Find a way to tune in and start figuring out what your cycle is and what it looks like. Start to take notes here and there throughout your cycle. If you notice a day that you're getting a headache and it feels like this is coming from a hormonal place, write down the day of your period or the day of your cycle that this headache is occurring. See if it matches up with the next month. See if you get headaches within like a 3-day window every time of your cycle. Same with good things. If you feel on top of the world and confident, are you ovulating? Are you close to ovulation? Take note of this stuff, because the more you tune in, the more you learn about yourself, and it's amazing.
Where can we find you and some of your resources? And I'll make sure and link those books that you talked about.
Oh,
as well.
Yes. Good. So I'm the Vagina Blog. You can find me. I would say Instagram's definitely where I hang out. So at the Vagina Blog, there's also the website, vaginablog.com. I have the Vagina Blog podcast, which is available pretty much anywhere podcasts are. And I do a little teeny bit of TikTok, a little bit of Twitter here and there, but mostly Instagram. Let's be
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been awesome, April.
Thank you for having me.
So many things from today's interview just blew me away, and I learned so much. I hope that you felt the same. Just to kind of recap a couple of the tips that April gave us at the end. The first one she said was to find a way to tune into your cycle and learn how it works, how you like to track it. Start to take notes throughout your cycle about how you're feeling and see if it matches up with the next cycle. And that includes the good things that you're feeling when you're feeling energized or like you can get a lot done, and also the things you might notice like, oh, I get a headache on this day, or I feel crampy on this day. I also really loved her thoughts around teaching our children to be compassionate and respect each other with the things that can be embarrassing for boys and girls. Thanks so much for being here. It's so amazing to have you be part of this community. Thanks for talking love. Join the conversation at ladies.talkinglove on Instagram and tag your friends who would like to participate. You can also check out our website, ladiestalkinglove.com, where you can access each episode and join our exclusive newsletter. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Instagram or by email to hello@ladiestalkinglove.com as we learn together. Thanks for talking love.